Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am your host, Deb Philman. Welcome to the broadcast. I have a great show for you today. But before we get started, I would like to ask you to please like and share this broadcast to get as many people seeing it live as possible. That way they can ask questions if they have questions of my guest. And also, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is where I cover all things related to education in America. And I have a locals channel where you can join me, and that's at thereasonwelearn.locals.com. We get into more depth there. There are some private live broadcasts and also resources for those of you looking to leave the public system. Today's guest is working in the realm of higher education. And her name is Joni, but she goes by Lady Spaulding on Twitter. And I discovered her because I noticed that she was engaged in fighting mandates at the college level. So I asked her to please come and talk with us about what is involved in that fight, what she's been doing, how it's going, etc. I am not as well versed in higher education, so I'm hoping to learn a lot today. Welcome, Joni. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Deb, for having me on. It's great
You're
to
so
be here.
welcome. So tell us about your organization, how you got started, and what you're doing.
Well, first of all, I am a concerned parent, first and foremost. I have a junior at Dartmouth College, and they are mandating boosters, vaccine boosters, along with 325 other colleges. And how this whole thing got started was as Jack was going back to school, I became increasingly concerned that he would have to get a booster that he didn't need, and I can get into that later. And so I thought, well, I'll find some like-minded parents and see what they're feeling about this. So I started with the Dartmouth Facebook group and tried to find some like-minded parents, which was tricky because most of the people on a Facebook group like that are not like-minded. So, you have to troll a little. And then I put up a tweet on Twitter. I had a very small account at the time. I still have a relatively small account, but I had like 100 followers. And I said, is anyone else out there concerned about their kids' colleges mandating boosters? Direct message me. And I figured I'd find 20 people and we started a little chat group or something. And overnight, we had 80 people who direct messages me. And then a friend of mine said, you have to start a Telegram group. And I didn't know what that was, but I went ahead and started it. And fast forward to, we're about 4 weeks in, we have 2,200 people on our chat group now.
Wow.
So there is quite a demand for people. There are quite a number of people who are, concerned about this. And since that time, we've gotten national media attention. I've been on Fox a couple of times. We've placed a couple of professors, students on there. We've done media. We're doing this. So we're raising awareness. So that's how it all started. It was just a matter of me deciding to raise my hand and raise my voice and find my people. It was nothing. I don't really have a special skill set for this. I was just concerned. And what was interesting, I think it was not surprising, but the most gratifying thing is that it's hard to speak up when and particularly because most of the people I know in my real life are not in this mindset. They are, look, whatever it takes to get back to normal. The FDA says boosters are safe and effective, and they say everybody should get one. So why shouldn't your kid get one? Just get the booster. And so it's a little bit daunting to raise your hand and say, hey, well, I have an alternate view. But once you do that, you find people. People say, wow, you spoke up, and so I can now, and how can I help? What can I do? Thank you for speaking up. So it's been great, and our numbers are growing daily.
So now would you say there's any sort of trend or commonality between the people or among the people in your group in terms of their reasons for wanting? I mean, what I've found is there are people who don't particularly have an issue with the vaccines, but they're
Right.
just principally opposed to mandates. Then there are people who are sincerely concerned about the medication itself and that, and so on. So I'm just kind of curious, like what you're finding in terms of the people's mindset.
That's a really good question. I would say that most people I come into contact are not anti-vaccine at all. And in fact, I'm not anti-vaccine. I've had a lot of vaccines. My son has been, vaccinated on the normal vaccine schedule. And I think that I don't think I would be inaccurate if I said that most people in this coalition are in that same boat, and in fact, many of them and many of the students they represent were okay getting the vaccine to matriculate in the fall, because they were and they complied and it was all right. But since that time, there has been such an immersion of new data, with about the risk profiles of these particular mRNA vaccines. So I think that that's something. Well, let me back up. So to answer your question, most people are not anti-vaccination. But what they are concerned about is their individual students' health, because most people have kids who have had the vaccination. They have apprised themselves of the data that says that these kids who are vaccinated already are at just about zero risk of any
Right.
harm from getting COVID, from dying from COVID, and that's per CDC data. So they're aware of this. So the question they are asking is, well, why does my kid need a booster if it's not going to do anything for him or her medically? And the second thing is that this argument that we've got to keep vulnerable people in the population safe, it doesn't hold anymore, because we've known since last summer, per Rachel Walensky, right, at the CDC, these shots do not prevent community spread. They don't. It's clear in real life. Just look around. It's also clear from the data. So I think people were thinking, well, wait a minute. Why does my kid have to get this multiple dose of this? First of all, rush through development. These shots were developed in record time. No vaccine in our prior history has been developed so quickly and tested so minimally as these vaccines. So when people say, well, other vaccines are, required this and that, it's really not an apples to apples argument. And
No.
people who are concerned about this, they know this. They've done their research. They've looked around. So that's one thing. The other thing is there is no long-term safety data for multiple
Right.
dosing of this, or for dosing of it, period.
Right.
So I think most people were willing to do it in what felt like an emergency last fall. But at this point, they just don't feel that their kids should be forced to take another dose of a medicine that they don't personally need and that does not do what the college says, which is protect vulnerable people. And
Right.
they also are very concerned about the risk profiles, particularly parents of young men, because this is the age group in which vaccine-induced cardiac events or thrombolytic events, such as myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart, pericarditis, which is inflammation of the sac around the heart. Those incidences from vaccines in this male population, many studies show that they are higher than if the kid got COVID.
Sure.
So again, it just feels like our students are being mandated to take on a risk that they don't need. And I think that that's really the main issue in this group. And then, there's the further issue of what happened to the rights of individuals. So I
Right.
think it's a mixture of things. But right now, I think the urgent issue is that parents are trying to make sure their kid is not placed in harm's way, and is being forced to make a choice to do that to themselves in order to stay matriculated in a college they've worked really hard to attend.
Well, and in some cases where they've missed 2 years of in-person attendance as it is,
Right.
when even without the vaccines, people in their age group were at low risk
Correct.
of being hospitalized or dying, not of getting it, of course. I mean, anyone can get it. But, so what I'm hearing you say is that contrary to the sort of mainstream narrative, these are not people who are, crazy conspiracy
Mhm.
theorists or paranoid or anti-vax, as they say. These are people who are just actually following science, because science is not a fixed point, right? We're always learning more and getting more data. And especially as you point out, because this was, an emergency use
Mhm.
authorization.
And
So
and
we
still is, and
right,
still
and
is.
and we all thought no, I think Moderna has been officially
Well,
approved.
yes,
Yeah,
Moderna and
just like
Pfizer,
yesterday or something.
right, they have been
Yeah.
approved, but I would urge you to do a little, like, not you personally, but anyone, They've been approved, but they are not available. So if you went in,
Right.
like Pfizer was approved, but if you go in to get a Pfizer booster, you're going to get the EUA drug in this country.
Right. That's what a lot of people don't understand is it's literally a different one
It's
that's
a
been
different,
approved.
it may not be terribly different, if at all, in terms
Right.
of chemical makeup or the actual shot, but it is a different legal entity, which
Right.
means that if you have a product under EUA, you have a liability shield, right? So
Mhm.
I can give you that shot and you could have a reaction and, you can't sue me. But if I don't have a liability shield, if my product is approved and not mandated under some vaccine schedule, then you can sue me. So what product am I going to put out in the market? I'm going to put the EUA product out. So
Sure.
even though those products are quote approved, they are not yet available. That's just a
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point. But it sounds like we're talking about really thoughtful people. This and
yes,
it's not political. This runs across all political lines. This is, these are people who are just concerned for their children and they're analyzing the data the way you would hope they would analyze the data. They're saying, what have we learned in the last year? And what we've learned does not align with this mandate. Now, the question I've been asking really since they shut colleges down. I mean,
mhm,
even before the vaccine issue, but it's now much more pressing. What obligations or liability does the school have to students who have signed contracts, who have loans, who basically committed to being students at their school, and now the schools effectively changed their rules or had changed their policies after that fact. So
mhm.
now they're like holding somebody hostage. And I've been wondering all along, like, where are the lawsuits or are they not possible?
Um, I don't hear anything about those lawsuits. And again, I'm not fully up to date on that kind of issue. But what I can tell you with this narrow issue of the vaccine mandates, and I think it does translate into this, I
Mm.
don't think the lawsuits are possible because the position of a university would be you're here voluntarily. Um, we can refund your tuition. You don't have to go
Oh,
here.
they will? They'll refund the tuition?
Well,
That's
they
been a
will
question. That's been a
not, they won't
question.
refund your prior tuition. They will refund
Right.
tuition on the normal schedule that they do. So, for instance, when we wrote to Dartmouth and raised the concern about the vaccine mandate, they did, to their credit, respond to us. Most colleges don't even respond, no matter how much good data you give them. I mean, the non-responsiveness of these universities to tuition-paying parents and concerned students is remarkable. But Dartmouth did write back. And one of the things they noted in their letter was you can apply for a religious or medical exemption, or tuition refunding is still available this term, 90%. So if you don't like it, basically you can unenroll. So I don't think there are going to be lawsuits of a change in how they do business. I
Right.
they certainly aren't as a rule, and I'm speaking for all colleges who have gone online. They certainly aren't living up to their intent of providing an in-person, excellent, enriching education for the students. But I don't think you'll see lawsuits there. I don't think, until students and parents decide that they are not going to go to schools, or they're not going to apply to schools, they're not going to, commit to schools who are going virtually and who are mandating these vaccines. Until that tide turns, um, I think the schools will just continue on as they do.
Right.
Um,
Right. They do and they have for quite some time seen themselves as sort of a consumer product. And so to your point, if most of the parents are like, just do it, just go along with it, if most of
mhm.
the students feel the same. Now, what I've been wondering though is how many schools are mandating these boosters and still masking the students, like in other words, still requiring masking,
Oh yeah,
still requiring them to eat in their dorms, still, shutting down most of the functions that, like the health center and the different places that you could go to socialize. That baffles me because if your argument is get these to protect the vulnerable,
right,
but you can't go anywhere on campus after you do, it's like you're admitting they don't work.
right,
So
exactly,
there's goes your reason for that. If you're saying, do it to protect yourself, well then why are you allowing them there on purpose at all? On in person at all? And then you're not delivering the service for which they're paying. Like at minimum, give people a discount. If you're going to make somebody show up
mm,
to Hanover and sit in their dorm and wear a mask and even like put it on in between brushing their teeth or whatever. I know at Amherst College, it's like insane. Then you're not really delivering this service they're paying for. In
Um,
all the materials and the brochures, and this is what our campus is like, and here's these wonderful facilities. If half of them are closed, and you've got to like eat out of a bag lunch, and I mean, this isn't college. That's not the experience people are paying for.
Absolutely right. I think it's very college by college dependent. There are some colleges that are requiring boosters that aren't even open yet, right? They've gone online for 3 or 4 weeks of the spring term. They're still online, but yet everyone had to be boosted to be online. So there's that. At my son's particular school, to their credit, they went right away to in-person classes in the winter term, but you still have to mask. There were some dining restrictions at the beginning. There are still, I think, restrictions for gathering. And then what's also horrible about this is you have a population that's highly, highly vaccinated at these schools, and they're still requiring weekly testing. So they're testing asymptomatic people who are supposed to have had these boosters that's supposed to keep them safe and keep from community spread, but yet they have to be tested. And then you'll be sailing along and you feel good and you get your test, and then they say, oh, your test is positive, and then you have to go into quarantine. You have no symptoms. So none of it holds together on the face of it. And I think that's the frustrating part for parents, is that if something doesn't make sense and it's not following what we know to be the current data, how do you go about trying to change it in any kind of logical way? And back to your point, this is a group of people who, yes, are mostly very mainstream people. I mean, I am a pretty mainstream person. Most of the people in this group are. I think they come from all walks of politics. Certainly there are people who are conspiracy theories, who post things that are not relevant to this, but most people are just people who want their kids to be okay and had all their vaccinations. So we're approaching it in a very logical, data-driven way. And what you get in response is stuff that doesn't make sense. So
Right.
it's highly frustrating.
And do you start to question if there's more to it? So in other words, like there's they're just stuck in a like feedback loop of incompetence and CYA, which doesn't make sense, of course, but like no one wants to pull the trigger. Or is there a financial incentive that we haven't yet discovered? So one thing I've learned researching a lot of the more onerous pedagogical movements and trends is that there is a huge financial incentive for people behind them. And so I begin to wonder after a while, when things don't make sense to this level,
Mm-hmm.
in a place of higher learning, where like there's smart people there. These are not stupid people. You have to start to wonder, like, who's afraid of being the one to pull the trigger and why? What's scaring them? Like,
Right.
what are the consequences of a president of a university or college saying, this no longer makes sense. We're not doing it anymore. That's it. We're done as of next week,
Right.
Monday, whatever, you're done. Like, what would happen? What's the worst thing in the world that's going to happen? And I haven't gotten a good answer to that.
Well, here's the interesting thing. The worst thing in the world that could happen is Hillsdale College, right? So if you look at Hillsdale College, Barry Weiss did a guest column the other day. I urge
About
everyone to
Bryn
read it.
Mawr to
Yes,
Hillsdale.
yes.
Yeah.
Jane, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her last name, wrote the column. She's a student at Hillsdale now. She
Right.
went to Bryn Mawr, and anyway, it's an excellent story. But just this is what happens when you drop all restrictions. You have Hillsdale. Now, I'm not aware of anywhere in the news where Hillsdale is a super spreader event, where the students are dropping dead, where the faculty are sick and hospitalized. So
No.
we have an example of what it looks like to not test your students, to not vaccinate, to make them get vaccinated. We have that example, and yet, it just gets brushed aside and ignored. The question of what is driving this is an excellent question. And I think there are many, many things. First of all, I think you can't discount the financial incentive. Like, as you've said, in certain areas, in the areas that you're very interested in public schools, there is a great amount of money behind the scenes that's either directly or indirectly forming this insidious environment where people just take the party line. So, for instance, just at the basic level, NIH provides a whole lot of grant funding to many, many institutions in the country. And you can go on their website and search by state and by institution how much money they got in grants last year. So, for instance, like a small Ivy League research institution got $91 million in NIH grants last year. I think I want to say U Chicago, maybe a couple $100 million. So and in some smaller colleges, they might get 11 million. It's a lot of money, right? And so I would find it difficult if I were getting $90 million from an organization to question what they're selling to the public,
Right.
So that's one sort of soft or maybe not so soft institutional capture. Um, the other thing which is really interesting is there's an organization called the American College Health Association, which
Hmm.
styles itself as they want to be the leader in expertise on student health at institutions of higher learning. I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
Well, if you look at their funding and the programs they put up, they work very closely with vaccine companies, very closely. They have Pfizer funding. They've done other workshops in increasing vaccine uptake. So they are very much a pro increased vaccine uptake organization. They don't seem like an arbiter or of objective, non, vaccine interests, right? So
So it sounds like they're literally experimenting.
well,
I mean, let me not
I don't know
experimenting,
that
but
they're experimenting.
they're using the data though for
They're
research.
suggesting they're suggesting policy for universities. We strongly recommend boosters. Well, of course, they're going to strongly recommend boosters because they are of the mind with their sponsors. Pfizer's a big donor to that organization. Now, it just raises the question, right? I can't say for sure, but it raises the question. If you're going to recommend against a booster, you don't want to alienate one of your biggest funders. So that's happening. The other thing is,
Sick.
so there's money that's everywhere. And if you really drill down, you can see that happening. Now, that may or may not be directly responsible for these policies. Here's another piece of the puzzle. And by the way, the ACHA has like 800 member institutions. Another piece of the puzzle is there is a White House college vaccine challenge. Okay, so you can go on the website and they have hundreds of colleges participating in this vaccine challenge. And so they provide support and I don't know that these colleges get paid any money to be in it. I don't think so, but certainly you get points, right? So you're part of the vaccine challenge. And so that's happening. And when all these things happen, particularly the government, really trying to set policy at public and private universities. My question is, where is Antifa, right? I mean, anti-fascism. I mean, this is a corporate government push, and it's just,
Well,
yeah, I know. We don't have enough time for that, but
no.
so that's all happening, but most people don't know about that. So those
Sure.
are all like the soft and not so soft influences that are being brought to bear on these institutions. The other thing that we've recently become aware of, and we weren't really thinking of this because when we're going at this at a university by university basis, people are going at the administration, right? You write to the COVID committee or the dean or whatever. And depending on how a college has their governance set up, the nexus or whatever we'd call the points of power are very different. So at a public university, you might have a very different governance structure at how these policies are set. And so it's possible that at some colleges, the faculty groups exert quite a lot of power in this discussion. And many faculty, and not all of them, but they kind of like this. They like teaching remotely. It's great for them. And they also are, for some reason, they feel like they're highly susceptible to COVID, maybe more than other people, or they're very, very afraid to catch it. They feel that the students present a real risk to them. And of course, you see that in public schools as well. So we don't know to what extent faculty groups are putting pressure on the administration to make sure these kids are boosted, even though they ought to know that a
Sure.
student's shot does not protect them. They ought to know that.
You would like to think.
Yes,
And
you will.
then the other thing is, let's remember, and every time I think about it, it kind of makes me cringe, but there's still a sizable percentage of the population that hasn't caught up with the latest data. I'm always amazed at how many people still believe what we believed last fall,
Mhm. Well,
like
or
a
last
year ago.
spring. Right, right.
It's there were a few like I've it's been tough for my teenagers because they're trying to make friends. They're homeschooled, but they'll go to a class like
Mhm.
a, exercise kind of a class or something. And my daughter was telling me yesterday, she said, I would like my friend to come over, but she's COVID paranoid. The
Aw.
14-year-old girl, her mom is, her dad isn't. So the mom got all the kids vaccinated. And now this girl is so afraid to come to our house. Like she'll be at the class with my daughter, she'll even hug her and everything, but she won't come to our house because my daughter's not vaccinated. And that's a real fear. Like she's genuinely scared.
Yeah.
And so I talked to my daughter about it. And even my daughter knows that like it doesn't add up. Like that doesn't why would she be more afraid inside her house than at the exercise place and that, all this, and it doesn't work that way. And she's vaccinated anyway, and she's not at risk anyway. And all these things, but they haven't gotten the memo.
Mhm.
It's like they just either they haven't gotten that information, it's not been, uh, transmitted, or for so long, any question about the efficacy of the shots was deemed misinformation. So
Mhm.
it wasn't just, "Hey, I have questions," and it sat out there. It was like, "You're blocked, you're banned, this
Right.
is misinformation." So what people seem to remember is that,
Mhm.
and not the subsequent Rachel Walensky going, "Oh, yeah, so about that," right?
By the
And
way.
s Yeah, by the way, so I think you still have you guys have, thousands upon thousands of members of your Telegram, but there are probably millions of parents who
Right.
think this is great,
Well,
and their kids think it's fine.
yeah, and I agree completely with that, and I don't know that first of all, we're all busy people, and everyone's just trying to live their life and take care of their families and make a living,
Right.
and we want to trust our public institutions to be transparent and clear with
Right.
us. We want to trust that when you turn on I don't normally, but when you turn on the mainstream nightly news, you want to trust that they've carefully curated and they are giving you objective information about what's happening. And so most people get their information from the legacy media. And if you like, whenever I'm like visiting my mom, for instance, and I watch Good Morning America or I watch any of those kinds of shows that are um, of that ilk, I understand why people are terrified. I understand why people think the way they do because there is not a presentation of an alternative discussion.
No.
And most people don't know how to read data. It's no fault of theirs, but most people don't. So they don't even know the right questions to ask. And I agree, people aren't caught up. But the fact that people who are in institutions of higher learning, who should be carefully considering all of the data, doing risk benefits analysis, um, having discerning thought, the fact that they still think that if my kid gets boosted, it's going to protect him and somebody else who's vulnerable. The fact that they still hew to that is it's baffling to me and it's unacceptable.
Well, and then
And it's also just go ahead.
if I'm the student paying big money, or my parents are paying big money for me to go to such a school, and the faculty members who I would hope are smarter than I am, like that's the whole point of paying to go there, are behaving in such a closed-minded, uncurious way. They're just like, nope, this is what I believed in. This is what I'm still going to
Right.
believe in. Stop talking and all this. Then, um, what exactly are you paying for? I mean, that's been one of my questions is
Sure.
people are going, and even in the private schools, like K-12 private schools, some of the things that people are hewing to are so far-fetched and outside the realm of reality that you start to wonder, what exactly am I paying for?
Right.
Right?
Well,
Because I'm hoping that my son or daughter is going to go to this school and become better educated. And by better educated, I don't mean they're going to walk out the door knowing things
right.
so much as having being better able to learn and
Mhm.
think and reason and all the things you need to do. And if they're in certain fields, obviously knowing things, but they're not teaching people to, they're not thinking, they're not modeling critical thinking. And I don't know that I want to go sit in a class where my professor is believing something that would be akin to almost witchcraft at this
Right.
point. Like, do you believe your horoscope too? Like, this is bizarre to me. We
Yeah,
know the evidence is out there. We
it's
know it's not,
clear.
I'm not spouting nonsense here.
Right.
It's real.
Absolutely. And not so much, it's not even just for people paying. I mean, I've talked to parents and students, and this is just really crazy making to me. First generation American kids who are there on very special scholarships, people who have great financial need. They are the most concerned because they're afraid if they speak up, they'll lose their financial aid. So it's not
Of
even that,
course.
but yeah, I think that there is a mass um, hysteria going on all over the country, and even
A
really, really
mass formation psychosis.
mass formation psychosis.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah, it's
prove it
something.
wrong. At this
Yeah,
point, I'm like, prove it wrong, because
right.
it doesn't make any sense otherwise.
No, it doesn't. And yeah, I don't know how to bring data to that party and have it, seen. I do think what's heartening and gives me a little hope is that people like Monica Gandhi, Paul ofFIT, who never met a vaccine they didn't like and are mainly pro-mandate people. They truly are. They're starting to say that, look, boosters are not necessary in this population. I mean, Paul ofFIT, he was on the FDA advisory group who voted almost unanimously, or maybe unanimously, against recommending boosters for the general
Mm.
population. I mean, 2 people resigned after that when the CDC overrode it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that those voices are starting to get heard. I'm still baffled at why at the institutional level, you still get stonewalled with, okay, like for instance, you say, here is the current data. And real data like Oxford studies, CDC references, not hearsay, not, fly-by-night institutions studying something in a bad way, real data. And you say, okay, here's what's changed since you made this mandate policy 4 or 5 weeks ago. And yet you still get the letter back saying the FDA or the CDC says boosters are our best way to protect the community. They are safe and effective. That's not science. That's not science. That's a platitude, right? So how do you have an interactive discussion on that?
I
You
have
can't.
no idea. I
Um,
really don't, but I think at this point, given how many times it's been repeated, and given that people still are leaning into that, and here's the thing. When you see talking heads talking about it, or, on the news, like CNN, if that's where people get their news, or even NPR, they aren't just saying, well, this is what the CDC is still saying. They express these things with a degree of certainty.
yes.
And I think that's what people are dialing into is so when you come at them and you say, yes, but the data is currently showing, and then you turn and said, the CDC says, and you present it with this kind of certainty in your
Mhm.
tone, that's what people are gravitating towards. And I think what that reflects to me is a desire on the part of parents. As you said, parents just want to keep their kids safe, and they want to, they just want to do the right thing. That they're attracted to that level of certainty because they don't have it.
Oh,
And
right.
because we've heard
So
so much
good.
conflicting, heard so much conflicting information across the last 2 years. Is this story, then that story, then this was contradicted. Stuff we thought was absolutely true turned out to be absolutely not true. Things that people said were conspiracy theories turned out to actually be true. And I think at this point, people are like, I'm going to go with who sounds the most sure.
Mhm.
And what gets me in the, when they're weighing risks now, they've added some risks to the risk pool, like that they're evaluating, that includes being socially ostracized, having a rift with their kid. I know in my own family, even, that just trying to persuade my eldest daughter not to get the shot I was putting my relationship with her at risk.
You are not alone in that.
And
You are not alone.
that's a really big problem, because,
Mhm.
these kids are like, "Mom, just, it's just let me just get the shot. Let's just go. All my friends are doing it." And that's where they are in their minds. They're
Sure.
in the here and now. All my friends are doing it. Just let me go have my college experience. They tell me everything will be fine. Just stop. You're being paranoid. They equate it to, any other advice we might give them that they think is old fuddy-duddy
Mhm.
advice.
Mhm.
And so,
Well, and there's a great deal of cognitive dissonance there. And I've talked to some young people who say, look, if I believed that there was a risk associated with this shot, if I really believed it, I would have to be really nervous for everyone around me because everyone on campus is getting this. And I can't carry that, right? So there's that too. And there's also the fact that you are going to be, you potentially are going to be excluded from some activities if you're not vaccinated. For instance, suppose you go to college in Boston and you're say you're 21 and you got some kind of exemption at your college or you don't want to be vaccinated. You can't go out with your friends in Boston if you're not vaccinated because they have a vaccine passport. So there's a greater problem there too. So there's so much pressure on these kids to comply because think about it, when you're 18 or 19, you're invincible. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. And you want to just live your life. And I don't blame people for that. But what I do blame is I do blame these colleges for putting those kids in a position of having to choose that,
Yeah.
and it's so disillusioning that no matter how much you hit them with the data, they're not budging. And kids are starting to get hurt. They are. And I can tell you that last week, a student at Boston College had an embolic stroke. He's 19. Kids don't have strokes. I mean, occasionally, once in a while, but he had an embolic stroke. And what that means is he had some kind of inflammation or thrombosis, and then he threw off a clot. This is what they think happened, and he had a stroke. He's okay, sort of. I mean, how okay is anyone after a stroke? But so that happened. We know of a young woman at Cornell who had a pulmonary embolism. We've heard people talk about students having cardiac issues. These things are, yes, they're anecdotal, but I know people in those loops. And so this is really happening. And even if you can't prove, let's say the BC kid or the Cornell girl or, what ended up happening at some other college where, I could go on and on. I don't want to gossip about these things. But even if you can't prove for sure that it was the result of a booster, you should still say, if you're making these policies, whoa, let's hold up here. Let's pump the brakes on this. These kids don't really need these boosters. Why are we mandating risk for them?
Right.
And
Exactly.
if some estimates of 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 3,000 young men are going to get myocarditis from this vaccine,
That's a lot.
that's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. And so when millions of kids across the country are being forced to boost in this age group, you're going to get a lot of myocarditis. And also people are like, oh, well, it's mild, it's transitory. Sometimes it doesn't even require.
Yes, but your risk of it is 0 if you don't get the vaccine,
Well, possibly.
It's near 0.
To be fair,
Mm.
COVID can cause these issues. And certainly in other ages of population, you might be better off getting the vaccine than risking COVID for myocarditis and these kinds of things. In this age group, the data showed otherwise.
Right.
But the whole peddling of myocarditis as being mostly mild, it's a heart injury. And the long-term prognosis for many of these kids it may not be good, right? I mean, this is your heart. You can have scarring. You can have long-term effects. We should be exerting extreme caution on this, and we're not, and it just boggles the mind, really.
Right. It's hard, I think, not to entertain, notions of sinister intent after a while because we have canceled vaccine programs for far less.
Far less, right?
Far, far less. I mean, thinking back to, I think there was going to be, or there was an initial swine flu vaccine at some point, and they had 200.
Yeah, and they shut the program down.
Exactly. And so this baffles me. We've had tens of thousands of deaths.
Right.
People have said that the person had the shot within 24 hours, they were dead.
Right.
It's not
right. These are on the VAERS system, which
Yeah.
is the adverse reporting system. Yes, it is. It was interesting. I spoke to, I think he's a cardiac surgeon of some renown recently for some time. And he also doesn't think that young people should be boosters, but he really loves these vaccines. He loves the mRNA vaccines. He says, and they are really elegant if you know how they work. they're just an elegant concept. It's really quite
I
remarkable.
don't think it's I know people harp on the mRNA technology, but, for me, it's the spike protein.
Right.
For
Okay.
me, it's more
Yes.
the what you're
You're
triggering the body to make
right.
is a toxin, and
Right.
it's not it what people don't seem to understand that our traditional vaccines are not just different because 'cause they're not mRNA. They are vaccines in the sense that they actually give you this, the sort of a dead version of this virus. You form the
Right.
antibodies and so forth. We're triggering the body to make the toxin, not injecting a dead toxin, to
Right.
make
To
the
make it.
toxin so that to trigger your immune system.
Right.
That's a very I mean, all of them trigger immune system, but after triggering it to manufacture a toxin, there's a fair amount of moving parts in there as far as whether or not you could end up with a kind of what they call VADES, where after too many boosters,
Right.
where your immune system goes, "Yep, not functioning anymore to
Right.
do the thing you want me to do." And obviously that's a theory, a hypothesis. I'm not saying that is happening or can happen. I'm just saying it is. That's when I talk to people about what their concern is, they're concerned about the possibility of that.
Right. And
And
we don't
especially the
know.
younger the person is, because the younger the person is, the more time your body has, especially if you're going to go one booster, two, but when did the booster stop? Four,
Right.
five, six? So an older person where you have less life in front of you than behind you, maybe it makes sense to take
Right.
this risk,
Yes, maybe it
right?
does.
Because the virus itself is more likely to kill you. But when you're young, now you're looking at, I kind of need my immune system to fight other things like
Right.
cancer for
Right.
the next 60, 70 years. So that's where I think parents of young adults are mostly concerned. They're saying, I'm dealing with a person not in the high risk group for just randomly getting it in the
Right.
open, you know, and then I want them to have the strongest immune system, natural immune system they can have. I don't know that I want to put spike protein or teach their
Mhm.
body to make spike proteins.
Oh.
That's at least what I'm hearing. The mRNA is not like, I know people make jokes about it, but that's not what I'm hearing the problem is.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I think I was just using that, because I wanted to
Yeah.
make a point
Yeah.
of what this guy says, but you are absolutely right. The platform, may not be an issue, but still, we don't know that either.
We
But
also don't really know the messaging that's being given.
well, I don't I
We know
can't
we're told that's that. Yeah. It's
yeah,
like,
I think they're probably doing what they're supposed to do in general, but I don't want to speak on that because it's outside of my wheelhouse. But what I will say is that this doctor said, this is how he characterized it. Yes, these vaccines have a very different safety profile than others before them.
right.
That's how he said it. Not concerning, not, it just they have a unique safety profile. And if you start talking about it in those terms, it dismisses the safety profile as being quite concerning. Um, so yeah, and I want to pivot, if you don't mind, a little just to
Of
the
course.
in addition to the physical risks associated with this, again, for mandating a medical intervention these kids do not need, that doesn't protect the community and carries risks. Okay, so no, who can argue about that, right? It's just a wrong thing to do, ethically, medically, however. But the other thing that's happening here, and I'm hearing from parents and children in this situation, is there is a lot of mental duress surrounding this.
Mm.
And I don't think people are associating a mandated vaccine with mental duress. And I'll give you a couple examples. I know of a senior who's in his last term. When he took the original vaccine to matriculate in the fall, he got really sick from it. I mean, not like myocarditis sick, but he was really sick and it took him out for a week and he felt really terrible and he didn't, that's not great. Then he got COVID recently. So he's recently infected with COVID. So now he has what we now know to be really good immunity, right? He has natural immunity, he has dual immunity from vaccination and the thing. Why should he get a booster? He's in the home stretch of his senior year and he's a wreck because he's got a really heavy course load and now he knows he's staring down the barrel of having to take a shot he does not need, that it's probably going to make him sick and miss school. Now that sounds like a trivial thing, but that's mental duress on top of all the COVID duress from all this other stuff, masking restrictions. And that's just one kid. I talked to another mother yesterday. Her daughter's on she was a recruited athlete and she's very valuable to this team. She's a freshman. She just had COVID. She didn't want to get the booster and her coach is pressuring her. just said, just get the shot, it'll help you. Now, since when this coach isn't a medical professional, and that's just not acceptable. First of all, the coach he's wrong. The booster is not really going to do anything for this recently infected kid who's already vaccinated, who's an athlete. He's pressuring her. And so this is happening a lot. I had one parent ask me if I would speak to her daughter because the parent she didn't have good English. And the daughter said that she and many other international students of international descent really didn't want to take this, but they all felt that they had to because they're all on scholarship, this group of people she's in. So the mental duress is a real thing. Very, very real.
And that's on top of the fact that they know they're also graduating into a world that is changing so rapidly. They aren't necessarily sure what's next for them career-wise.
Right.
There's inflation. The availability of affordable rental housing has declined dramatically because of that rent moratorium, that they had for so long. And most of these kids, when they come out, are going to be in a position to need to rent apartments. I mean, if I'm a college age student today, I have a lot of stress outside of this shot. The
Yeah.
shot is kind of like, just one more
One more
yoke around their
thing.
neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one more thing because all of our kids, I would say all the kids are struggling, but the ones who are in their teens, like 13 and above, where they start to have a real sense of like, oh, this adulthood thing, I do have to do it, right? I'm not going to be able to stay here forever. I think they are really struggling. And like I said, the college kids have had maybe this fall. They've had since this fall that they've been back on campus. Most of them, a lot of them were either home or they were in a dorm room or something for the last 2 years. And honestly, I just think it's cruel. So it goes beyond, it doesn't make sense, and it feels abusive to me.
Oh, I
That
agree
there aren't
completely.
people with enough, that there aren't enough adults inside these institutions with enough backbone and decency to just say, we've reached a serious point of diminishing returns here. We should at a minimum let people have the choice,
That
to
is so well
mitigate
put.
their own risk.
That is so well put. I agree with you completely. And I spoke to a dean yesterday who pointed out that most colleges are, really concerned about the mental health of their students because it's not good. I know therapists on campus, and even without COVID, because of
Yeah.
social media and all these pressures, and it's not good. But so there is a concern there, but they're not putting it all together. They're not
Mhm.
putting it at the forefront of their policies. And I think, I don't think in general they're sinister intent. I mean, I certainly think there are very bad actors in the world, but I think a lot of these people think that they're doing the right thing. And I will say, I think they're very lazy intellectually, and I fault them for that very, very much because they're not saying, wait, something's not right here. I'm going to really drill down on this. They're just saying, well, CDC says we're going to do this. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think the pressure on these kids is tremendous. I don't think it's getting talked about enough.
Mhm.
And I think the only thing that we can do as parents, as children, is to pick a point of pressure and keep hammering at it. I
Mhm.
think in our group, there are so many things to be concerned about, right? So there's the testing, the incessant, unnecessary testing of asymptomatic people that results in quarantining and all sorts of inconveniences and hysteria, cases. So there's that. There's the masking. There's the restriction of social interaction. There is the shutting down of dining halls. There are teachers, and I know this firsthand, who will write to their students and say, I'm relying on you to protect me from getting sick because I have a child at home, or my mother-in-law has, compromised immunity. I mean, they are putting this on the students. I know this firsthand, right? So you've got all these things happening. Yeah, I know. I know.
I like
Yes, 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 yes.
I struggle. If there's one thing I really struggle with the most in all the work that I do, it is the degree of casual abuse casual verbal abuse, casual narcissism
Yes.
on the part of people who are in charge of teaching.
Right.
And I don't care if they're not minors anymore. Like, you have a huge responsibility. You are influencing the way a young person thinks and sees the world around them and sees the adult world in particular, the
And
one
thinks
they're
about
about to
them.
enter.
Yes, and thinks about themselves. And particularly, we are teaching children, young children especially, that somehow they are unsafe to others as they
That
are,
is
right?
so damaging.
It is. And we don't think it was like, okay, honey, you got to put this mask on or you'll get grandma sick. Or, you can't see grandma until you're vaccinated. So the implicit message to a kid is that I am a danger as I am,
It
as
is
I naturally
actually
am, I am a danger. And that
it
was,
violates the laws of nature in my view.
yeah,
In
it's,
the in the world as it is ordered, adults are supposed to care for children.
right.
That's how we are biologically and evolutionarily designed. We are not I mean, you're supposed to put your own oxygen mask on first. And I mean, oxygen, that's not a great analogy, but you
No,
know what I'm
but I
saying?
know what you
You
mean.
protect you and you do not obligate a child.
To
I've
protect you.
seen that it's even in when I got divorced, okay, they made in the state of North Carolina, they make you go take a class.
Mm,
They make you go take a parenting class. Everybody has to go through it prior to any kind of custody discussions, where one of the lessons they hammer over and over and over again is do not parentify your child. Do not put your personal problems on your children. Do not obligate them to take care of you emotionally, to take care of you physically, to have that is your job. And you have to do your level best to shield them from these kinds of adult issues around which they have no control. So, and the younger they are, of
that's
course,
sacred. That is a sacred
it,
trust.
it that is just it is the mark of maturity.
Yeah.
It is the mark of maturity. And what I am seeing are professors and teachers and university presidents and people like that who are behaving worse than the absolute most immature children
Hmm.
towards children.
Well,
They're setting a horrible example.
and as a society, we're putting it on our young to protect the elderly, and
It's
what kind
so
of society does
backwards,
that?
so wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's happening, and also what's happening is these institutions, and my kid's at an elite school, all well, and I'll tell you what Yale did the other day, which was just on so many levels. But so these elite school, any college, they don't even have to be elite. They are training the young leaders of tomorrow. They are minting our young leaders, right?
That's
So
scary.
when you are a good parent, or you do the best you can to provide the right example, right? If you want your kid to act with character, you show them how to act with character. So you've got these universities, and by example, what they are teaching these students is, okay, I'm the university. I have the power here. The power differential is big, right? You want to be on my campus. I'm going to say, you got to take this unnecessary medicine. You got to comply. Just get it done. And then you can remain as a student. So, what that teaches somebody who's going to be a leader someday, or a parent or whatever, is that it is okay to put somebody in a position where they have to take an unnecessary thing into their body, or maybe just something they don't want to take. Like, what's wrong with, I don't want another dose of this? Especially, I mean, it's not Ebola. It's not a 50%, death rate. It's not, I mean, I'm not discounting the
There are
severity of
people
COVID.
who turn down the chickenpox vaccine.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I'm just saying,
it's
so the point is that they're in a position to be leaders, and they're teaching them by example that it's okay to disregard the fundamental bodily autonomy rights, the rights of choice, the rights of medical privacy. It's okay to do that if you're in power. Okay, so that's what they're learning under the surface, and that's very troubling to me. This is America. This is not how we're supposed to be doing things. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about other people, right? So if I am a risk to somebody truly, I should probably make a little sacrifice or whatever, so I'm not a risk to that person. But this is not the case here. These students are not risky to other people. And by the way, these highly vaccinated, highly boosted population, they are still overrun with Omicron right now, right? And the kids are, I mean, it's not great, but it's not it's not a disaster. It's a flu.
It's
It's a
not like
simple.
there's meningitis
Right.
spreading around the campuses,
Right.
and it's not like, I mean, there were cases of that, and they didn't shut down. I mean, they
Right.
would maybe close for a day or two and sanitize everything and then come back. But I mean, that we have had flu where you have like thousands of kids out with the flu. Not everybody is mandated to get a flu shot. There are things that make people sick, and this is the first time that we as a culture have reacted like
Yeah.
we have to have no sickness at all, no
Right.
sniffles, no coughs, no fevers, no nothing. And we used to just be, I'm not suggesting people go to class sick. I'm not suggesting people go to work sick. I'm just
Well, if you're
saying
sick, stay home. I mean, it's that simple.
it's that simple. But we used to be a people who didn't act like you were, carrying a deadly, you were a disease vector
Right.
just because you didn't take a certain medication. Like you
Right.
could be symptom free, not visibly ill or anything. And I don't know. I think we need to talk more about the mental health of these kids, because the risk to their health and to the health of, if people are worried about the broader society, is far greater if you have a large
Absolutely.
percentage of people who are mentally ill.
Yes.
Mental illness, and I don't mean to like stigmatize it, but it's extraordinarily costly. It's costly emotionally, it's costly financially. Um, it ruins lives, it ruins families.
Absolutely.
It
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 ruins
it
nations.
it absolutely does. I mean, we become uh unprepared to deal with real hardships, like real crises. God forbid there really were a war or lots of natural disasters or things like that. If you got people who already are barely holding it together because they feel like they have no autonomy,
Mhm.
no sense of personal control, um, you're not ready to stick up for yourselves.
Right.
And when you pointed out that these are our leaders of tomorrow, that's really scary.
Well, and I think that as a population, I mean, in the broader sense, we have no grit. We have no grit as a population. We
Yeah,
have a very luxurious way of life in general. I'm not saying that there aren't people in the margins. There surely are, but
right.
we have it really good in this country. And so I think we've gotten soft in terms of taking for granted our freedoms, taking for granted our lives, and we're filled with all these busy things. So I think as a population, we were sitting ducks to take all this and not question it and not demand transparency and data. Um, we don't teach our young people real civics. We don't teach them the responsibility of being a citizen in a free society. It's not just something that you can coast on. And I've never really thought about it much. I mean, it's not that I didn't vote or I didn't get involved with things, but in this whole thing that I'm doing and that has happened around me, what I've realized is we have to, each of us, be a stakeholder, and people say, well, I'll sign that petition if someone writes it. And my point is, no, go write it. You go write it. Nobody is going to do this for you,
Right.
and I think that's what these parents are realizing, that they have to go fight for their kid. The kid has, and the students really need to start fighting for themselves, but they don't even realize there's something to fight for. They don't realize they can. There's a group of Chicago University students at the Chicago Thinker that are doing amazing stuff in this arena. So I would encourage anyone to go and look at their writing. It's the Chicago Thinker. Um,
Chicago thinker.
yeah,
Okay.
they're amazing, and they've had some real media. And if all of the students were doing this across campuses, the universities
Mhm.
would back down.
I
So
think it's so fascinating. It's coming out of Chicago. Is this related to the University of Chicago?
yeah, they're University of Chicago students, and some years ago, a few years ago, the senior editor there, her name is Audrey Unverfirth, I think her name is. She and other people founded this, and it's I guess people would call it a conservative, very libertarian kind of leaning
Mhm.
newspaper. And they wrote a petition taking U Chicago to task for using them as lab rats. And they just said, you
Yeah.
can't do this anymore. And they got
Right.
so many hits, their server went down. And so they've had some Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham coverage. I mean, they are an intrepid group of kids, and those are the leaders. Those are the leaders I want for tomorrow. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I may have to contact them and see if I can get them on and talk to
I
them.
will link you up. I'm in touch with
Oh, that would be
one of
great
the
because I
people
mean,
there.
I've
They
been
are,
asking
yeah, you want
why
them.
I had a gentleman on. He's a high school student, and he was talking about the group that he created. It's like a Students United for high school
Oh,
kids to
wow,
talk
that's
about a
great.
variety of things, but he's mostly focused on, uh, viewpoint diversity and making sure that students know their rights in the classroom as far as speaking up and asking questions and not just taking what the instructor says at face value and all that, that they have actually more rights than the teacher in
Mhm.
terms of free speech, and they just how to use it responsibly and politely and all that. So he's created this organization,
I love
and
it.
I'm actually not surprised to see University of Chicago students because the University of Chicago uh, economics department has traditionally been very data driven.
Mhm.
That's where Milton Friedman was. Thomas
Right.
Sowell went there, and all this, and they seem to be sort of like a I don't know, like almost a bulwark against the mob. I think the president even put out a letter last year saying we're not doing safe spaces and we're not doing speech
Right.
codes. And I think so they get my admiration. I would love to speak with them.
But they did,
But
but they didn't open up. They delayed campus this year, and they shut
part
down
of
last year.
yeah, part of what's hindering them, I think, still is they are in Chicago.
Ugh, yeah, don't
So,
get me started.
there's that.
Outside my purview. But yeah.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I think what we have to remember, and I keep telling my audience about this, that people say, why aren't the students doing this? Why aren't the students doing that? Well, imagine you spent 13 years in a system that was gradually teaching you to conform,
Yeah.
go along to get along, and that the way that your ultimate goal was not to be a deep thinker. Your ultimate goal
Right.
was to get into college.
Right.
And the
Right.
process of getting into college has a lot more to do with checking the right boxes, getting the grades, getting the scores, demonstrating, almost like a trained seal, like demonstrate things, demonstrate things, demonstrate, don't ruffle feathers, do as you're told. And most of that was reasonably benign. In other words, the things that were being asked to do, the things that were being asked to go along with were not, so awful, right? It's
Right.
just that there wasn't you know, a lot of and now is the time you're going to take some risk and you're going to fall on your face and you're going to fail. People in sports have that a little more than people who are not involved in
Right.
the sports.
Right.
But if you're a real academic person and just kind of driving along to the academics, they're not letting people fail.
Right.
The GPAs have just climbed and climbed.
Oh,
There's grade
so much
inflation.
great inflation.
So these kids, especially by the time they get to an elite school, they have one thought about achievement, and that is fear. Like, I've been smart my whole life. I've been doing well, but doing well. I can't fall from this pedestal.
Right.
And the way I got here was not by ruffling feathers. The way I got here was not by asking tons of questions and poking and prodding my
Mhm.
professors. So I'm not exactly going to start now. And not forget that they don't even know how.
Or
It's
it
a
doesn't
it's a
even occur to them to.
no.
Yeah.
And the reason this channel is called The Reason We Learn is I try to impress upon people that you have to teach people how to think. It is not automatic. We have the capacity for reason. That doesn't mean we know how to use it
Mhm.
effectively. And increasingly we're seeing teachers who are not doing that. They're saying, "Show me where the such and such is in this passage," as opposed to open-ended, "What do you see? How
Right.
does this work?" Because they want a specific answer.
Well, it's easier to
They're not
grade too.
It's easier to grade. There's so many incentives. And so you've got extraordinarily bright students. This is not to take anything away from these students. The kids who end up at Dartmouth, the kids who end up at Yale are really not less bright than they ever were. They just haven't been using their brains in the way they would need to be using them to feel empowered to ask these questions.
Right.
This requires like a way of thinking, and they're not used to it. And they also now know, because we've had several years of cancel culture and everything else, there is a high risk
Mhm.
associated with pushing back.
There
There's
is.
social risk, there's academic risk, there's career risk. But we now know, you said something in high school and nobody wants to hire you. You said something in college and you're blacklisted from your industry. I
That's
mean,
nuts.
these kids have 1,000 more worries than I ever entered my worst nightmares when I
Yes,
was,
absolutely.
18 to 21.
I agree completely. And what you were saying about how, getting the grade and doing this and that it's
Yeah,
not terrible and it's benign. It is benign on the surface, but what the tragedy is,
yeah,
what's lost
exactly.
is that you lose this big opportunity. And I know you know this, would think it is, you lose an opportunity to create really good thinkers. And to your point about the social pressure, we live in a college town, and it's very politically liberal, and the diversity here is diversity of immutable characteristics, right? So if you want diversity, you have to have people with different skin colors and this and that. There's never any talk about diversity of thought, diversity of
Exactly.
opinion, right? And that's it's just not even in the equation. So
It's almost like they assume that if you look a different way,
right,
you
that
have
you have
different viewpoints,
right,
but that is absolutely not true, and in fact, the people who are most bought into the representative diversity narrative have a tendency to think one way. They have a
yes,
tendency to be thought aligned, and
right,
those who say, because I've had people say to me, "Would you be okay with an entire freshman class of Asian students if it was just purely by the kids with the highest grades and high scores?" I said, "Well, first of all, that's statistically highly unlikely
right,
because it's not about just the highest scores. And they're also extracurriculars and so forth. But if
right.
you're taking the highest qualified, I'll tell you what, I know I don't have a problem with it." And then people are aghast. Why? And I'm like, because I don't. Tell me why I should. That's the more important question.
Right.
Tell me why I should. Tell me why people all looking a certain way is inherently a problem. And the reason is they're assuming that if you look a certain way, you think a certain way, and that's a false assumption.
Yeah, or you've had, if you're one race, you've had the exact same experience as everyone else in your race,
Mhm.
and it must very much be different from, the kid who's not the same color. I think there's something to, diversity of immutable characteristics, but I just we just forget that it's really important to have different opinions at the table, because well, we could go on about that, but I
Right.
wanted to just say a couple of things about our mission, in
Yes.
case anyone is listening to this and is feeling like they're up against it, right? A couple of things. There are many, many college groups of forming, of like university systems, SUNY college parents, CUNY, UCal, all that. So there are those things out there. You can probably find them if you come to our Telegram chat, which is a little bit of an overwhelming um, scrum of people because it grew so fast. We have like 2,200 people in it. But I can, give you the links to set that up.
Yeah.
It's in my profile, or I can try to find it and set that up for you right now.
Here, I can get it from the
Okay,
profile.
so
So,
we have a channel where we put out calls to action, and then that's linked to a bigger discussion group where anyone can post. And
okay.
so parents are coming in and students are coming in. So we have professors, we have staff coming into this group and saying, "Hi, I'm here. My son goes to Trinity. Are there any other parents here? I'm looking for a religious exemption, or I'm trying to get a medical exemption, or I'm concerned about this." And so people are connecting and finding their people. That's our website, and that will give you the links to many
Right. The
resources.
join the Telegram group is the first
Right,
link when you go to the website.
right. And it's kind of a janky website, but all it does is it points you in the right direction. So it serves its purpose. So you will find other like-minded parents there, and you will find people who can help you navigate your individual situation. Which colleges are offering religious exemptions easily? What to do if yours is rejected? If you have a medical exemption that you're looking for, which by the way is nearly impossible to get because doctors will not write them. So it's a clearinghouse of resources. Sometimes it's a little messy, but keep at it. You can find people in subgroups. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, what I would say to anybody navigating this, you are not alone, that there are more people in your circle who feel as you do than you think. When I started trolling for like-minded people at Dartmouth, I got a couple here, a couple there, and they keep coming. I get direct messages, put yourself out there, say, this is how I feel, get in touch with me, you know,
Mhm.
and so I think little by little, individually, and then to continue to elevate public pressure on these institutions, to change course and just to keep the data march out there, that you do have power. You just have to find your people and act.
Right. I think that's a great final message is that, use your voice and it doesn't you don't have to start with lots of people. Just
Mm-mm.
go ahead and do it.
Or
Chances are
any
somebody
special
out there.
skill.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, I just started talking on the internet.
Well, I owned a
And
baking company before this.
yeah.
I'm a food scientist by training.
Oh, how funny. We
Um,
could probably have a whole conversation. I was after college, I was a pastry chef for a while,
oh
and
my
then I
God.
went back to it in later adulthood for a while too. So that's my like other skill is baking.
Well,
How funny.
I'll give you my address.
Yeah, definitely.
No, but
Um,
anybody can do something.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
anybody.
can. And I thank you for doing it because I have a college bound senior and she's so far only applying to one school and plans to defer her acceptance if she gets in and hope that they currently don't have a mandate, but they're masking and testing.
Ugh. Well, that's
So
another thing. We do have parents of students who are looking, and there are resources that show you, what schools offer mandate, what schools offer choice. So yeah, you have to
that's
have
good
this
to
in
know.
mind.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to say more is that we're fighting right now the booster mandate, but that's not the end game. The end game is to get rid of the vaccine mandate for this on campus, so that it's not like, okay, right now it's a booster mandate, but next fall it's just you have to be in compliance, you have to be fully vaccinated. It's another booster. So we've missed some of the deadlines here. It's not a loss. We're in this for the long haul. So I would encourage everybody to keep that in mind.
That's a really good point. Is it, like, where does it end? That's one of the things I told my daughter. I said, okay, so let's say you got the first shot, then there's a booster, and then there's another. Like
Right.
there's no logical endpoint to it. So why do it at all? You're kind of just, you're not gonna, they won't consider it counting after a certain point.
Right. I
So,
mean, I can't say medically if the kids should be vaccinated the first time or ever, whatever, but it should be a personal choice at this
right,
point, knowing what we
right.
know.
Yeah, I was just saying to her, like, if you're not okay with boosters, factor that into your decision. So, in other words, if
Yeah.
your person is saying, well, I think I'll get the vaccine, okay, just remember that it doesn't stop with just that one. Unless,
Right.
I mean, you can say that it does for you, but if your reason for getting it is this is going to open my life up again, or I can now live as normal, not necessarily. Because
Right.
if the schedule is going to, keep going, then you're going to find yourself again in the same position at the next however many months or whatever later.
Right.
So just be sure that when you are doing it, you're okay with the whole process, I
Right.
guess is my point.
Right.
Um,
Because
so
even if a college isn't mandating boosters right now, I mean, think about it. Like, get the vaccine, we'll go back to normal. Here we are, masked, restrictions, testing,
yeah,
boosters.
yeah, there's not normal. It's not
Yeah.
normal. So I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing this information with us. I hope all of you out there will share this broadcast with other parents who might be interested in this and need this, and encourage them to get involved and join the Telegram group so they can be informed and help their kids navigate this difficult decision. And I hope you win. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
hope.
Well, we hope so too. And just our Twitter handle for the group is at Free College Kids. And my Twitter handle, if you want to follow me, is
Okay,
Lady
so
Spaulding 11.
at Free College
At
Kids.
Free College Kids. And that's
Okay.
the official Twitter of our
Free College Kids. Okay. And then yours is
Lady Spaulding 11. And no, I'm not really a lady. I hope
well,
this
you
was
are.
useful. I hope this was
You're
useful
wait,
to
no, you
you.
mean you're a birthing person? I'm kidding. Joking. All right. Well, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing and the courage. It does take courage. I know you're saying like I'm just a person and I'm doing it, but if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. And so obviously it takes a measure of courage to just be that first person to say, "Oh, I'll do it." I don't know I'm doing it, but I'll do it.
Well, I think
And
everyone
that's
should
what
do
I
that.
wish we had more of. We need more of that kind of courage of convictions to say this is wrong. I'm going to do something. So way to go, mama.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching. Please share the broadcast and everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.